So this is the worksheet for the variety of living organisms. Bacteria, fungi, protists were the three kingdoms that we talked about. Now viruses can cause disease but are not classified as living. Explain why viruses are not classified as living. वो हमने यहाँ पे बता दी because they do not move, do not reproduce, do not excrete, do not respond, do not feed, and do not control internal conditions. Now name a disease caused by a virus. Now अगर मैं कहूँ we have to name a disease. Now I told you a disease about, first of all, there are two types of viruses. We have, if a virus contains DNA, it is known as DNA virus. But if a virus contains RNA, it is known as a retrovirus. So that retrovirus is the one that causes HIV/AIDS. So this is one of the disease that is caused by a virus. A new group of pathogen called prions was discovered in 1980s. Prions are simple proteins. All known prion diseases can be fatal because the immune system does not recognize prions as foreign. Suggest two ways in which prions differ from viruses. Now there they have given us a hint. What is that? The prions are simple proteins, and also हमने difference बताने की क्या difference होगा, we can say that uh, they have different genetic material. उनका जो genetic material, that is different. Moreover, viruses have a protein coat. Prions itself is like a protein. Protein coat. उस protein coat का नाम क्या होता है? Capsid, if you remember. तो ये हो गया. Moreover, viruses can act as vectors. Vectors क्या होते हैं? Which transfer a disease from one place to another. The table gives features of three different groups of organisms. Complete the table by putting a tick in the box if the organisms in the group have the feature and a cross in the box if the organisms in the group do not have the feature. The first one has been done for you. We have bacteria, fungus, virus, all are pathogens. Cell walls of it, so हम ये कर लेते हैं. Is bacteria a pathogen? Yes or no? No, it's not. ठीक है. Are the cell walls made of chitin? No, they are made of peptidoglycan. Do bacteria contain a DNA in a nucleus? It's a prokaryote. Prokaryote do not have their DNA inside a nucleus. Moreover, does bacteria respire? Yes, it does. Group of organisms की बात करें, we talk about fungus. Now, fungus की अगर बात करें, fungus does not have a protein coat. It is not a pathogen. Cell walls are made up of chitin. Yes, cell walls are made up of chitin. And its DNA also contains a nucleus, and they also respire. Viruses की बात करें, they are pathogens, but they do not have a cell wall, they do not contain a DNA in the nucleus, and they do not carry out this life process known as respiration. So this is a table, a very important one, to how to differentiate between the three kingdoms in front of you, which is bacteria, fungus, and virus. The following organisms can be classified into major groups. We have amoeba, lactobacillus, bean, mucor, and mosquito. From the list above, give the name of a bacterium. अब इनमें से एक bacterium का नाम दें. Now, lactobacillus was one of the bacteria that we just studied in the previous chapter. कौन सा है? That is going to be lactobacillus bacteria, the rod-shaped bacteria. Then we have a fungus. A type of fungus कौन सी बताते हैं? Mucor is a type of fungus. Mucor, mushrooms, yeast, these are all fungi. Flowering plant इनमें से कौन सा? A bean plant. Normal bean plant is a flowering plant. जैसे बाकी plants होते हैं, wheat, agriculture के जितने भी हो जाए, they are all your normal flowering plants. An animal. Which of these is an animal? Obviously, mosquito is an animal. It's an insect, ना, ठीक है? तो वो insects किसके अंदर fall होते हैं? They fall under the animal. Amoeba itself is a आप कह सकते हैं protist, और amoeba को हम protist के अंदर करते हैं, and it's also a microorganism, a unicellular one, by the way. Viruses are not included in most classification systems. Give three ways in which viruses differ from other living organisms. Now, how do viruses differ from other living organisms? हम ये लिख that viruses only reproduce inside the living cells. They only reproduce inside the living cells. Also, they have a protein coat. Other living organisms do not have protein coat. Other than that, you can also say that, yeah, it can contain, it has no cytoplasm. Yeah, no mitochondria, no chloroplasts, no nucleus. So there are a lot of differences. इसके अलावा they don't carry out the 7 life processes. अब वो 7 life processes क्या हैं? तो 7 life processes are the Mrs. Grand one: movement, respiration, फिर क्या है, sensitivity, growth, reproduction, excretion, nutrition. The 7 life processes are not carried out by viruses. Give one example of a disease caused by a virus. Name the organism it infects and describe its effect on the organism. अब हमने एक disease का नाम लेना है. Let's see if I talk about AIDS. यहाँ पे mention कर देता हूँ. The name of the disease is HIV, AIDS. Which organism does it affect? Animals? No. ये तो humans के अंदर आते हैं. It's mostly common in humans. And what is the effect of HIV/AIDS? अब ये आपको याद रखना. First of all, just remember, it mostly affects the immune system of the person, and hence he or she is more prone to get infected. मतलब कि वो ज्यादा प्रोन हो जाते हैं इन्फेक्ट होने की वजह से, बिकॉज इट मोस्टली अफेक्ट्स द इम्यून सिस्टम ऑफ द पर्सन एंड हेंस ही और शी इज मोर प्रोन टू गेट infected. अगर आपका इम्यून सिस्टम वीक हो जाएगा. Now what is the immune system? Immune system is your body's defense against diseases, and if it gets weak, then it's trouble. The photograph shows some viruses, suggests two reasons why most biologists do not classify viruses as living organisms. Again, the same repeated question: why viruses are not classified as living organisms? Because again, do not respire, yeah, do not excrete, yeah, do not reproduce, or do not feed. There are a lot of examples. मतलब आप सारे life process को mention कर सकते हैं. Name one example of a virus. कोई एक virus का अगर हम यहाँ पे नाम लें, for example, I have HIV virus, then I have that tobacco mosaic virus that affects the plants, tobacco mosaic virus. इसके अलावा Ebola virus, COVID-19 virus. There are so many examples. Influenza virus भी है. फिर swine flu. So many examples of viruses. HIV हो गया, tobacco, then we have Ebola, influenza, swine flu, COVID-19. All of these are the examples of viruses. You can only write one of these in your paper. आपको एक mark का सवाल है, you'll be writing any one. Give one structure difference between a bacterium and a virus. Bacteria और virus के दरमियान क्या structure difference होता है? First of all, bacteria are bigger. Viruses are smaller. This is one of the difference. इसके अलावा flagellum is present in bacteria. This is not in viruses. Other than that, bacteria has cytoplasm. Viruses do not have cytoplasm. Flagella क्या होता है? What is flagellum? If you ever see a typical bacterial cell, this is known as flagella. The tail of the bacterial cell is known as flagella. Antibiotics are chemicals used to kill pathogens that cause infections. Name the type of organism that makes antibiotics. एक organism का नाम हमने लेना है that is used to make antibiotics. Now remember, we have a bad bacteria, but we also have a good bacteria. So bacteria and fungi can both be used to make antibiotics. Name the type of pathogen that is killed by antibiotics. Antiviral are there to kill virus. Antibiotics are there to kill bacteria. But just imagine you are using penicillin to create an antibiotic or vaccine, and then you're using the same bacteria vaccine to kill a bacteria. So antibiotics are used against bacterial infection only. They cannot, agar, let's say you are infected with COVID-19, an antibiotic won't work on you because antibiotics are only there for bacterial infections. They are not for antiviral. Some antibiotics are no longer effective in killing pathogens. Use your knowledge of natural selection to explain why. वो कहते हैं कुछ antibiotics जो है ना क्या होता है अब वो ज्यादा effective नहीं in killing pathogens. This is not related to this chapter. We'll be studying this later on. But remember that some bacteria undergo mutation. Mutation क्या होती है? A change in the genetic material. जब कोई भी bacteria mutation undergo करता है, its genetic structure changes first of all. Moreover, there is now variation. उन बैक्टीरिया के अंदर एक वेरिएशन आ जाती है. This is also one of your upcoming classes. Variation क्यों आती है? Moreover, they start to survive. मतलब कि they are not affected by those old antibiotics because they become resistant. Some bacteria become resistant. That is why if you ask your parents, they would be telling you some names of those antibiotics that were there in 1980s, 1990s, but they are no more available now. For example, Soften एक बहुत famous होती थी. Then इसके अलावा आपके पास कौन सी म्यूकेटोर होती थी एक. ठीक है, these were some antibiotics that were really common in the 1980s and 1990s, but they had stopped being sold in the market because the bacteria that it was made to fight, that bacteria actually became resistant. Once the bacteria became resistant, now those previous antibiotics were no longer effective. Again, the market was now filled with some new antibiotics. This is, for example, like हम COVID-19 की बात करें. COVID-19 at a point also became resistant to vaccine. We saw new variants. COVID-19 it did undergo some mutations as well. For example, first we got a COVID-19, then we got a COVID-19 Delta variant, then we got a COVID-19 Omicron variant. What are these? These are different variants. COVID-19 virus, COVID-19 Delta virus, COVID-19 Omicron virus. This is all happening due to mutation. But हम ये कहते हैं ना, every you can say every type of those after the mutation you have to change the vaccine as well, because maybe the vaccine might be applicable on the old COVID-19, but the new variant, the Delta cron ho gaya ya Omicron ho gaya, the vaccine might not be effective on that because they have become resistant. इसके अलावा they then multiply. When they become resistant, they then multiply. Now the Omicron, ये कोई भी नया bacteria, they multiply, they replicate. Once they replicate, they spread, they produce offspring. They produce offspring. The use of pesticide may result in an increase in the number of pest targets. No need to do this now. This is from your chapter of natural selection. We haven't covered this yet.
Okay.
The table shows 4 different groups of organisms. Complete the table to give an example of each group. Animals की अगर मैं एक example दूं, given just let's talk about an example of animal. क्या हो सकती है? Human. Fungi की अगर मैं एक example लूं, I told you, mucor is a type of fungi. ठीक है? Yeast, mushrooms, toadstools. Bacteria की example ले अगर lactobacillus. You should also know more. Lactobacillus के अलावा you should also know salmonella. You should also know about pneumococcus, the round-shaped bacteria. ठीक है? These are some examples of bacteria that you should know. Mucor के आगे भी मैं लिख देता हूँ yeast, mushrooms. These are some more examples of fungi. Moving on, protists. Protists में कौन-कौन से आते हैं? Amoeba या chlorella. Other than that, we have Plasmodium. You only have to list one. I'm just telling you, so आपके पास ज़्यादा data इकट्ठा हो जाए कि Plasmodium भी है. Then we have algae also. I forgot algae. ठीक है, ये सारे Proctist kingdom में से आते हैं. Plasmodium इनमें से जो है ना, Salmonella also causes the Salmonella virus. Salmonella disease एक होता था जो कि chickens में से arise हुआ था. It basically came from birds and chickens. Then Plasmodium की बात करें, Plasmodium is the one that causes malaria and dengue through the Anopheles female mosquito. Different groups have different features. Complete the table below to show if the feature is present in all, some, or none of them in each group. Some of the table has been completed for you. Fungi की बात करें. All fungi, all fungi are multicellular. No, some are. ठीक है. उसके बाद अगर हम बात करें बैक्टीरिया, आर बैक्टीरिया ऑल मल्टीसेलुलर? यस. Their cells have nucleus? No. बैक्टीरिया में न्यूक्लियस नहीं होता. None. Do protists have a nucleus? No. None. Cells contain chloroplasts? Yes. अच्छा. Cells contain chloroplast. Fungi के अंदर chloroplast होते हैं? Yes. All of them have chloroplasts. Do cells have cell wall? Fungi has a cell wall made up of chitin. Yes, it does. Moreover, cells have cell wall. Bacteria also has a cell wall made up of peptidoglycan. Do protists have a cell wall? अगर हम protists की बात करें तो yes, some of them have a cell wall, some of them don't. This is a very important point जो याद रखना कि some protists have a cell wall and some of them don't. Give one way in which the structure of a virus differs from a bacteria. अगर हम देखें तो एक स्ट्रक्चर हमने ऐसे बताना है. I just told you. Same repeated सवाल है. Give one way in which the structure of virus differs from a bacterium. आप लिखते हो viruses are smaller. They don't have cytoplasm. They don't have membrane bound organelles. Membrane bound organelles का क्या मतलब होता है? Membrane bound organelles होते हैं जैसे कि we have chloroplast. We'll be doing chapter number 4 जिसके अंदर organelles की बात करेंगे. जैसे कि chloroplast, that is a double membrane bound. Mitochondria a double membrane. Nucleus a double membrane. Ribosome single membrane है. So viruses do not have membrane bound organelles. Moreover, they also don't have a flagellum. Bacteria and viruses can act as pathogen. Give an example of a disease caused by a virus. Virus की एक disease का नाम लिख देते हैं. Like HIV/AIDS. One example यहाँ दे दी हमने. I also told you tobacco mosaic, influenza, flu, cold, measles. Measles किसकी वजह से होते हैं? Measles is caused by variola virus. अभी एक monkey pox भी आया है. That has just I was there at a workshop yesterday. तो वहाँ पे हमने monkey pox के बारे में देखा था. How it has risen. That was also a virus. ठीक है, वो भी तो एक virus ही है. Although plants and animals have many different features, they also have some features in common. The table lists some features. In each box, place a tick if the feature is present or place a cross if the feature is absent. One has been done for you. अगर हम बात करें plants or animals की, they can move from place to place. Plants cannot move. Animals, yes, animals can move from one place to another. Can plants carry out photosynthesis? Yes. Can animals carry out photosynthesis? No. Are plants multicellular? Yes. Animals, they are also multicellular. Do plants have cell walls? Yes, they do. किससे बनी होती है? Cellulose. Do animals have cell walls? No, they don't. Plants, they do they store carbohydrates as glycogen? No, they store it as starch. They store it as starch. Animals store carbohydrate in the form of glycogen. ये आपने चीजें याद रखी. Organisms that cause disease are known as pathogen. Give two groups of organisms that include pathogen. कौन-कौन से हो सकते हैं pathogen? Bacteria is a pathogen. Pathogens क्या होते हैं that cause disease? Then you have viruses. The two most common examples. Fungi भी तो है. Fungi also causes athlete foot. तो आपके पास protists भी हैं. Protists के अंदर plasmodium है. Plasmodium causes dengue fever. Fungi है. Fungi can cause athlete's foot. Viruses है. Viruses can cause influenza, COVID, a lot of them. ठीक है. Bacteria है. Bacterial infections भी होते हैं. Doctors sometimes give antibiotics to very ill patients. The passage below describes the treatment. Complete the sentences in the passage by writing a suitable word or words on each of the dotted lines. Antibiotic solution is given to the patient through a tube. The tube is connected. ये वाला छोड़ दें. This is from our chapter of transport in animals. ये क्वेश्चन जो है ये आपका नेक्स्ट चैप्टर से है. ये हमारा चैप्टर नंबर 8 है, ट्रांसपोर्ट इन एनिमल्स. Leave this for now. A student is given, leave this one too. This is also from nutrition. ये हमारा nutrition chapter में से है. हाँ, ये हम कर सकते हैं. Different groups of organisms store carbohydrates as different molecules. Complete the table to show an example from each group of organisms and tell how do they store carbohydrate. Animals, plants, and fungi. Example from a group. Now you're going to tell me the answer right now. ठीक है, पहले बताएं. Example from the group of fungi. Name anyone.
The mushrooms.
Can you speak a little louder? I can't hear you.
Mushroom.
Yeah, exactly. Mushrooms हो सकते हैं. Yeast हो सकता है. Okay. Now tell me the molecule used to store carbohydrates in animals.
Glycogen.
Exactly. Glycogen. Plants में क्या होता है?
Starch.
Exactly. What about fungi?
I'm not sure.
Glycogen. Same as animals. Got it?
Okay.
So these are the types of storage molecule जो कि आपको animals, plants और fungi में मिलते हैं. And this is the end of your today's worksheet. हमने आज bio में एक और worksheet कर ली है from the first two chapters. Today I'll be uploading chapter number 1, chapter number 2 of biology and these worksheets as well. Tomorrow you'll be having a test of your biology chapter number 1 and chapter number 2, the characteristics of living organisms and the variety of living organisms. इन दोनों के आपके टेस्ट भी हो जाएंगे. लेट मी सेव दिस वर्कशीट और फिर मैं आपको यहाँ से दिखा देता हूँ. लेट मी ओपन अप अ शॉर्ट वीडियो.
Bacteria and viruses. And the aim of this video is to give you an overview of what they all are. So don't worry about remembering everything. I just want you to understand what makes them all different. If we exclude viruses for a second, these other 5 groups are the 5 kingdoms of life. So almost all living organisms will be in one of these 5 groups. Viruses, though, are the odd one out, because as we'll see later, they're not actually living organisms, so aren't in any of the kingdoms of life. The other thing that I want to point out, before we go through each of them individually, is that these 4, animals, plants, fungi, and protists, are all eukaryotes, or eukaryotic organisms. This means they're made up of eukaryotic cells, which have certain things in common, like the fact that their DNA is in the form of chromosomes, or that their DNA is found in a nucleus. On the other hand, bacteria are classed as prokaryotes, so we sometimes call them prokaryotic organisms, and they don't have a nucleus. Their DNA is just loose in a cell. They're also between 10 and 100 times smaller than eukaryotic cells. And remember, viruses don't count as organisms, so they don't get classed as eukaryotic or prokaryotic. But for perspective, they're another 10 to 100 times smaller than prokaryotic cells. So let's now run through all of these groups one by one, starting with animals. You probably know this kingdom pretty well already, so there's not too much to say. Although we don't know for sure, our best estimate is that there's somewhere between 5 and 10 million different species of animals on Earth, ranging from humans, to chickens, to ladybirds, to lionfish. What all animals have in common though is that they're multicellular, they're heterotrophs, and most of them reproduce sexually. The term multicellular just means that each individual organism is made up of loads of cells, rather than just one. For example, it's thought that an adult human is made up of around 40 trillion cells. Meanwhile, heterotrophs just means that animals have to get their energy from other organisms. For example, we have to eat plants or other animals in order to get the energy that we need. Moving on to plants, this kingdom is pretty familiar as well, and probably includes around 300,000 species, ranging from redwood trees, to bee orchids, to tomato plants, to water lilies. Like animals, plants are multicellular, so they're made up of lots of different cells. But importantly, they are autotrophs rather than heterotrophs. This means that they get their energy from the sun using photosynthesis, rather than by consuming other organisms. Next up, we have fungi, which are a bit harder to explain. Some fungi, like the mushrooms that you might eat, or the molds that can spoil food, are multicellular organisms. But other fungi, like the yeast that we use for baking bread, are unicellular, which means single-celled, so each cell is its own organism. Although some fungi look a bit like plants, a key difference is that fungi can't photosynthesize. Instead, they have to get their energy from other organisms, like animals do, so they count as heterotrophs. Weirdly though, we often refer to fungi as saprotrophs instead, because most fungi feed using saprotrophic nutrition. This is a process whereby they secrete digestive enzymes onto some food outside of their body, wait for the enzymes to break down the food, and then absorb the broken down nutrients back into their body. So they're basically doing digestion outside of their body. Another key feature of fungi is that some of the multicellular ones have a body called a mycelium, which is made up of loads of little thread-like structures called hyphae. So just remember that loads of hyphae together make up a mycelium. Another thing to note is that although it's pretty rare, some fungi can be considered pathogens, which means that they can cause disease in humans. For example, it's a fungus that causes athlete's foot. If we move on to protists, the first thing that I want to clarify here is that the terms protists, protista, protists, and protista all mean basically the same thing. So don't worry about which word you use, they all refer to the same kingdom of organisms. But for this video, I'll use the term protists. Nearly all protists are unicellular, so single-celled organisms. But there's still a huge amount of variety between the different species. For example, some species, like chlorella or euglena, are a bit like plant cells, in that they have chloroplasts which allow them to photosynthesize. Whereas other species, like amoeba, are more like animal cells, and have to consume other organisms to get their energy. A last point to mention is that most protists have nothing to do with humans, but a few of them do count as pathogens and can cause disease. For example, the species Plasmodium is a thing that causes malaria. Next, we have bacteria, which we'll be coming back to in other videos because there's loads of interesting stuff to know about them. But for the basics, these are single-celled organisms that live just about everywhere you can imagine, including on your skin and in your intestines. Although some species of bacteria can photosynthesize, none of them have chloroplasts, and most of them feed off other organisms, either living organisms like ourselves or dead ones like fallen leaves. Scientists think that there are probably way more species of bacteria than all of the other kingdoms combined. And although a few of them can cause disease, like salmonella, which can cause food poisoning, most of them don't have anything to do with humans. And many others are actually really helpful, like the bacteria in our intestines, which help us to digest our food. Lastly, we have viruses, which are basically super tiny particles. It's actually really hard to imagine just how small viruses are. But to give you a reference, you'd be able to fit almost 1 million of them across the width of a single fingernail. Now, we call them particles because they don't count as cells. And remember, they're not living at all. Viruses come in loads of different shapes and sizes, so it's hard to be too specific. But their basic structure involves a protein coat around the outside, surrounding some genetic material on the inside, which could be DNA or RNA. The main thing to remember about viruses is that they can only reproduce inside living cells, so they have to infect other organisms like animals, plants, protists, fungi, or bacteria, and use their cells to replicate. Because of this, we call them parasites, which just means that they depend on another organism to grow and reproduce. For example, they can't reproduce without infecting something like an animal or a bacteria. One last thing to add is that unlike the other groups that we've seen so far, all viruses can be thought of as pathogens, because they always cause harm to the other living organisms when they use their cells to reproduce. A few examples of viruses include the influenza virus, which causes influenza, tobacco mosaic virus, which affects tobacco and tomato plants, HIV, which can cause AIDS, and of course, COVID-19. Anyway, that's everything for today's video, so I hope that was helpful for you. As I said at the beginning, the main thing I wanted you to take away from this is just a general understanding of the differences between these different groups of organisms. There was a lot of detail here, and the important thing wasn't remembering it all, but just getting that sense of what they are.
And this is all for the biology class. Take a 5 minutes break and then join again for chemistry.